Welcome to our presentation on Renderman. This is technology we've been creating at Pixar since before Pixar existed. Renderman started at the computer graphics group at ILM, but before we get into that, let me introduce myself. My name is Dylan, and I'm happy to be talking here at CTIAF. This is a new event for us, a new festival, and we're always interested in reaching out and meeting new people. So I hope what I will be talking about is interesting to you, and I hope so because it's interesting to me. In my role in the Renderman group at Pixar, where I've been working since 1999, I've been part of the development. I'm a technical artist in the Renderman group, where we developed the software that we use to render feature films. And I thought it might be nice to introduce you to kind of the philosophy behind Renderman. Pete Docter, one of our fantastic directors here at Pixar, has an idea here where he says we want to push the limits of storytelling. So what Renderman really is software that's been designed to deliver the creative vision of a director, to produce new types of images that haven't been seen before, and to take people on new types of stories and journeys. More practically, what Renderman does is it takes geometry. So we have geometry, maybe it's some kind of sphere in this case, as you see over here. And then we want to create an image of it. Renderman shoots rays from the scene's camera into the scene. When it hits an object, it figures out what color it is. So if it hits that ball, it's going to run the shader, determine that the ball's blue and how much it's illuminated by the lights in the scene, and return a color, which becomes the image. This is a simple diagram. In a more complex example, we can see here is that we have an image from The Lion King. And on the left-hand side, you can see that the field, the savanna, looks photorealistic, and on the right-hand side, it's white. That's because it doesn't have shaders applied. It's actually just geometry. The lions also are just geometry. The fur, it's all CG, the entire world here. And Renderman has been engineered to handle this amount of complexity, to make fur look photorealistic, but also to render it efficiently. And the shaders and lights that you're seeing here, the shaders for the rock and the water, those are the same types of shaders that we use at Pixar. And Renderman ships with the same technology we use for our lights and shaders. Renderman has been used in the industry since 1988. And here are a few films that have used Renderman. It looks like there's quite a few, actually. And if we get down to the bottom here, you can see that there's a film from 1984, Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan, which used Renderman's core algorithm, which later became Renderman, the rays algorithm, to render the Genesis effect. That was one of the things that turned me on to computer graphics when I was a kid. More recently, here are some films that you might recognize, blockbusters that had lots of visual effects, animation that used Renderman to deliver those final pixels. And here are some fun facts. I thought this would be a good way to introduce you to the kind of complexity that we find in production at Pixar. First off, let's take a look at Toy Story 4 in the Antiques Mall. You might remember the Antiques Mall. It was full of stuff because it was an antiques mall. If you counted up all the antiques, there were over 10,000 antiques. Each of these is an individual prop that might be made of different components, and they can be highly complex. So we shoved them all into this warehouse, rendered the warehouse with all these props in it. It was seems complex, right? Well, here's some more complexity that we encounter in production. On Soul, here's Joe's sweater. You can see the light spinning around it in the middle. And His sweater was actually woven out of digital cloth, a geometric primitive that we call RA curves. And there were over 238,000 threads in his sweater. This was created as a polygonal mesh and converted to threads at render time with Houdini. You can see the threads over on the right-hand side. So there's threads for the fuzz on the sweater and also for the woven sweater. Here's a Melba's tunic. This is even more complicated than Joe's sweater. If you zoom in, you can actually see each individual thread converted at render time to this woven material, over 644,000 threads. So all the clothing that you see in Soul, or most of the hero clothing, is actually woven together out of these threads to make it more realistic. And then you look at something like Toy Story 4 and kind of the dust and dirt that you find around there. For a shot like this, you'd have about 50 million dust fibers in the shot. And those are also made with RA curves. Let's follow Woody as he walks back behind this cabinet. And he's like, what a mess. Because there's just dust and dirt everywhere. And all that dust and dirt happens automatically in your own home, in my home. Like the dust just accumulates and you have to clean up and do all this stuff. In CG, it doesn't automatically happen. You have to actually put that dust into the scene. They have a lot of tools and then you have to render it. So the amount of dust that you see on that, the glass on the window and on the side of the cabinet, all that has to be placed there and made to look realistic. So Renderman handles all the geometry and then delivers photorealism at the same time. This shows the buildup of the dust. So from small, tiny dust to larger strands to kind of dust and particles that are scattered around. This is a kind of complexity that we need to deal with when we want to make things look like an old antique mall that has dust kind of all around it. Next fun fact is, if you go back and you look at Monsters Incorporated from 2001, here's our friend Sully. Sully was state-of-the-art monster at the time. And he had a total of 2.3 million hairs, also RI curves. And today, the dirt in Toy Story 4 is more complex than our dear friend Sully. Now, if we look at Coco, you may have seen Coco because it's a great film. If we look in the background here, that's not a matte painting, that's all geometry. And all those little lights that you see in the background, those are actually 3D lights that have been placed into that world and are actually generating illumination. How many lights are actually in the scene? There are over 8 million lights. So that's quite a bit. And Coco production had to work with Renderman development in order to basically get the renderer to do that. We had to do some customizations and expand the abilities, the renderer's ability to handle millions and millions of lights. That's something that is still in there. So Renderman can handle a lot of complexity. And here is an example of some of those point clouds with the lights on them. Now let's go back to Toy Story 4. Here's a nice outdoor scene. We actually modeled all of the outdoors, all of the trees, all the bushes, all the grass. Guess how many leaves were in the world of Toy Story? Well, if you guessed 6.7 billion, you're right. There were 6.7 billion leaves in Toy Story 4, which seems like a lot until you count the amount of pine needles in Toy Story 4. If you take the time to count all the pine needles, you end up with over 1 trillion pine needles. And also amazing that we can get an exact number. Like, it's a computer, it knows how many pine needles are in the scene, over 1 trillion. This is a point where we get to a place where a lot of people are like, wow, you know, Pixar makes really complicated movies. I could never do something like that. And We do have a sophisticated pipeline, but Renderman is something that's not just for big studios. If you're working in CG and if you're rendering things, you can take advantage of the robustness of Renderman and the flexibility and the high quality images. But we have plugins for Blender, Houdini, for Katana, and Maya. And one thing I wanted to talk about was our new Renderman Fundamentals. This is something that we've developed during the last year. And these are official training materials that allow you to dig in and to learn how to use the shaders that we use at Pixar that ship with our software, how to use the lights that we use at Pixar for movies that also ship with our software, and all the different aspects of the tools, from our integrators to other stuff. Great set of training materials. And they're available on our website, renderman.pixar.com, and also the YouTube. You can check them out. So what are we doing? What have we done lately? Well, we're shipping Renderman 24, version 24, that's right, of Renderman. And I'm going to get into that. But before I do, I wanted to say that you can try non-commercial Renderman for free. You can use it on an independent short. You can use it as a student. As I always like to say, you can try non-commercial Renderman because it's not going to try itself. So anyway, what's new in Renderman 24? Well, for people that like version numbers, we released version 24.0 in June, 24.1 in July, and this month, later this month, we're releasing, at the end of the month, we're releasing 24.2. So we're always improving the renderer. And what's the big news about Renderman 24? Well, we've added GPU acceleration to our new renderer called XPU. So now you can use all the hardware on your machine, from CPU to GPU. And if you notice on the left there, it says you can see results faster. I spelled C like ocean because I'm funny like that. Here's an example battle between XPU and RAS. XPUs are new GPU accelerated renderer. RAS is our current CPU renderer, CPU only renderer. And this is a head-to-head workflow battle. So what's going to happen here is that we have the same model, which is a teapot, transparent, has lots of gears and stuff in it. I'm going to press the render button, go. Here we go. And we're going to start seeing pixels come in. They'll start coming in a little bit faster with RAS. And XPU, once everything gets loaded up onto the graphics card, starts up, the buckets come in immediately. And it's just much faster converging, especially with a lot of transparent objects. So I have some bookmarks set up in my scene where I'm just going to step through the bookmarks as soon as the image converges enough where I can get a time to first decision whether I can like it. So basically on the top, XPU is really fast. I can get to time to first decision very quickly, move the camera around, make parts of the geometry invisible. And then I can start adding things like different shaders and focusing on look development. For initial phase of XPU, we have a tool that has a complete feature set for look development. So you can create your shaders, modify your shaders, modify your shading networks during your interactive session, see how the displacements look in relationship to your different objects. And then render in RAS when you want the features that aren't implemented in our XPU yet, such as volumes, light filters, things like light temperature. So right now, XPU and RAS play very well together. XPU provides a very seamless experience for look development. And it's fast, that's why we developed it. We have a new plugin with 24, which is Blender. So now you can use all the cool features in 24 in your interactive session. So in this case, I have our old familiar teapot. It has a texture from Simpsons Painter on it. And I'm just going to do some things like move the light around, and you can see that it updates very quickly. I have this running in XPU mode, so you can see just how interactive and fast it is. We don't see buckets coming in, spiraling in. They just all appear at once, and it's very fast. I can rotate the camera and start scrubbing through the timeline so I can blow it out and look at the different objects inside of my teapot. And I'm going to add a Pixar Vary node, which is one of our kind of procedural nodes that you can wire into your shading networks. And what this is going to allow me to do is basically take the texture that's going into the shader that's attached to everything and vary the texture based on object ID. So if the director comes along and says, hey, why don't you, looks great, but can't each of those objects be a different color? Well, I can use Pixar Vary to add a little bit of variation to the color of the object, instead of the alternative, which would be going and adding a different shader to all of the different objects, changing the color slightly, which is a pain. And here we go. I just added the hue, changed the variation to 0.9, and let's say the director comes back again and says, well, why are they so colorful? It's like, well, you told me to do it. Well, maybe the director wanted the color variation to be not as extreme. Maybe it was a little bit more subtle. And that's where we get into non-destructive complexity, where we're able to dial back the variation. And here we have orange, a yellow, and kind of a in between there. We can change the saturation, we can change the luminance as much as we want, and call it non-destructive complexity. So when the director has a note, it's easy to accommodate that note without going and having to change all the shaders. We just have one shader attached to all these guys in our new Renderman for Blender plugin, which actually is really great. I'm enjoying it a lot. There's also more in 24. So we have many new tools for look development, and I just wanted to go through and show some of those to you. First of all is we have Material X Llama. If you're thinking about this, it's not that. What Material X Llama is it's a layered material system from ILM that they use on their shows like the DeLorean. It's a node-based lobe system that allows you to assemble your own sorts of shading models. You can use a diffuse machine, a dielectric, and kind of make a whatever model that you want for rendering a physically realistic object. And here is an example of our plugin for Substance Painter. It now exports materials directly into our preset browser, the Renderman preset browser, as Llama Network. So I've attached a smart material here in Substance Painter. I'm going to go over to the preset browser, and I'm going to export that as a Llama Network. I can choose my color configuration and put it right into that browser. And I can load up the preset browser in Maya and Houdini and then Blender and Katana and share shaders and resources back and forth. So loading that up right now. And this is a great tool, the preset browser, if you want to build up your own custom libraries and share them with production. So we'll render that and voila. Perfect. Then we can go to Maya, and I have my preset browser over on the right-hand side or left-hand side there. I'm just going to attach it to my teapot, and voila, the shader's instantly attached. I have our statistics there, so I can see what that does to the scene when I attach that shader. We get the statistics coming live about how many rays are being bounced around, and there's my shading network. So very cool. We also have some new skin presets that are coming out in the next week. These presets are based on the characters from Soul, Luca, and other Pixar films. And as you can see on the top, these secondary characters from Soul have a diverse set of skin tonality, and this new preset library captures that. So if you're building out characters, you can go and use these as the starter materials to get started. So all new and very cool, and also something you can load up in the preset browser. And that brings me to Stylized Looks, interactive photorealism. So first of all, I want to show you some of my investigation into Stylized Looks. This is an illustration style that I wanted to investigate and see if I could get Renderman to render something that looked like this. And it turns out that 4 of these drawings are actually rendered in Renderman and 4 are illustrations. Take a look, see if you can guess. Here are the drawings that were rendered with Renderman. And here is the base art that I used to render those drawings. So looks pretty good. Let's step through these and see how this looks. This is a living illustration. So this is the actual illustration stylized in Maya, and you can see it's interactive. So I can actually go in and add things like, white specular highlight to it. Makes it look pretty good. I can scout out locations inside my drawing as it is stylized. Here are stylized looks as they're implemented in Renderman. The first component is lines, or artistic stylization is creating things with lines, as in this example from Soul. Kitbull has a painterly approach. The short Out took another watercolor approach, and even a stylized 2D look from some of the things that we're working on at Pixar. And so we decided to implement it in our own renderer, creating stylization. So we have the ability to create different kinds of lines based on line thickness on lighting or whatnot. We have the ability to create hatching. So this is a custom hatching that I created myself. I just drew 8 progressive textures. Those get mapped depending on the signal that you're feeding it. In this case, diffuse on this teapot. And here's an example of a living illustration using hatching. So I'm going to turn on the Stylized Looks. I start getting this nice hatching across my teapot. You can see that it's varying quite a bit and getting actually multiple crosses of hatching as it's getting darker. And then I'm going to add a layer of lines on it. So the line will be thicker where it's in shadow and thinner where it's illuminated. So let's back up here. Kind of check out a nice angle for the stylized render, and then I'm going to activate the lines. And you can see that that really kind of gives it a little extra weight, starts feeling like a technical illustration. The heavy lines are in the areas of shadow, something that you can adjust and dial in as you see fit. And we have other types of things like traditional illustration techniques. So you can change the area of focus, adding more contrast where you want the viewer's eye to go. This is an example of adding focus in Renderman using light filters. So I have an example here where I have a rig that I move and it adds the extra detail to the top, or I move it down and it adds the extra detail to the bottom. So kind of cool. We also have ideas like level of style, which we're investigating. So in this drawing, the car has a lot of detail. The robot on the back is very washed, but we can create a rig similar to the areas of focus that would allow us to move it around and give certain objects within it that extra detail. And just to bring kind of the idea home, this is all being done within the DCC like Maya or Blender. It's not being done in compositing. So we get to take advantage of animation curves in the application, or coordinate systems, or ST mapping, or everything that's basically in that DCC. And here's a little animation playing back, and it turns into a stylized teapot from PBR. So we can mix those two things together. So kind of cool there. I used VR sculpting as the underlying geometry in my kind of initial R&D experiments. And I just wanted to cover that real quickly. I used Adobe Medium. There's a lot of different creation tools worth looking into. If you've seen VR sculpting, it looks like this. If you put the funny headsets on, you start modeling stuff. You have your dragon. I have my dragon. I'm going and modeling it. You can see here, I put my name on it because I'm incredibly vain. And if we look at the slide here, I was basically able to take my illustrative style, even though I'm not a sculptor, and create a VR sculpt in about 40 minutes, add some textures to it, and render with Renderman. I really like the end result. So I did a lot of investigation into VR sculpting, exporting a mesh, doing things like texturing with Substance Painter, just bringing it into my traditional VFX pipeline. Here's my dragon with XPU. I'm able to pre-visualize it in my look development with a shader that's going to look like a 3D print. I can turn the lights off. I can turn the lights on, rotate my guy around, and it's just a very smooth, fast experience using XPU. And then I can create bottle openers, and I can create models that don't look like they're made in the computer. They actually have the same kind of kinetic motion that I would make in a drawing. And putting it all together, just showing my work in stylized rendering is that I wanted to hit this target here, and for ground truth, instead of emulating what light does in the scene, I tried to emulate what a gel pen, a white gel pen, a black brush pen, and a Coptic marker would do. And I took some reference art of mine and I broke it down into the components that I thought I could create using the Renderman stylized system. So these are all drawings that I broke down. Then I took my VR, I created the stylized geometry. And this took me about 7 hours to render, to model. I added some textures to it in Substance Painter, made it a physically based render, and then I broke that down into the components that I wanted to put together for the stylized render. Each of these outputs is actually from Renderman. I layered them all together and I got this end result. First attempt, and I thought it was a good, successful experiment. So what I did then was I took this technique to October 2020 and did the entire month using stylized renders with VR sculpts, and I had a lot of fun with that. And here's just an example of Hope with an ink bottle, and you can see that the underlying geometry is pretty rough, but when it's rendered stylized, it looks hand-drawn. And here's an example of taking the same object and then animating it. So I'm animating the object, then I'm animating the lights, and you can just see how it's reacting. And here's just a little bit of workflow going from geometry to adding some lines, to adding some cross-hatching, to adding some specularity and all that jazz here. Just easy to build it up, break it down. And so encouraging first steps for the stylized rendering that we have now in Renderman 24. So Renderman is really becoming a tool for broad look development. So from physically based rendering to stylized stuff. There's also a lot more in Renderman 24, from new patterns to we have support bases out of box. So the Academy color encoding system, that's all supported with out of box tools. We have the real-time statistics, which I showed you, some blue noise sampling and OSL and lots of good stuff. And as I close up here, I'd like to thank you for listening to the talk. I hope you learned a little bit about what Renderman is and how you might potentially use it on your own projects. Again, you can try a free non-commercial Renderman. It's not going to try it itself. And you can use it for a limited time with XPU. We're making that available with the NCR downloads, and you can use it on your projects as long as they're non-commercial. And with that, I would like to thank you, and it was a pleasure talking to you, and perhaps we'll see you here next year.